Live from the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador. This is From the South, and I'm Sweeney Gray, extending a very special welcome to viewers joining us in Antigua and Barbuda. We start in Venezuela, where a three-day event in solidarity with the Bolivarian Revolution is drawing to a close. Over 300 participants from 95 countries took part in an event called We Are All Venezuela. Let's go to our correspondent, Freddie Gillingham, who's at the event. Hello, Freddie. What's happening as the event draws to a close?
So, welcome back to the Teresa Carreño Theatre for one last time. It is indeed the last and final day of the major events taking place here at this venue. Smaller activities are expected to continue for the rest of this week in smaller pockets around the capital, but the main event here at this venue is closing today. We are expecting President Nicolas Maduro to arrive at any moment now. He's expected to be addressing international delegates in the auditorium just in front of me. We've been speaking to a huge range of people over the last couple of days from all corners of the world. Just to give you a bit of an idea, a big batch from the Caribbean. Today we spoke with a large group from Trinidad and Tobago, from St. Lucia. Yesterday we spoke with a very nice young chap from Dominica. He had just come back to Venezuela for the first time. He had been studying here for around 5 years. He'd been studying as a medical student. He's now working in Dominica, where he's working on the recovery efforts of that terrible hurricane which happened recently. Venezuela is stepping up its efforts to unify at a time when external threats are mounting against the country. They're seeking to destabilize and isolate the country. Just to give you a bit of an idea of some more of the people that we were speaking to today. We bumped into the Venezuela's Minister for African Affairs. He spoke to us. He just finished a tour around the African continent. He'd finished it with Jorge Arias, the foreign minister. This is what he had to say to us. I think we can play you that clip now.
All the messages we received were of respect. They respect the sovereignty of each country, and they believe in the non-interference in internal affairs. And in Africa, it's easy for them to understand, because one of the continents that has suffered colonialism till very recently, and imperialism has been especially the African countries. They're still suffering from this. So they understand very well what's happening in Venezuela. Before the revolution, the Bolivarian Revolution, we almost didn't have any relation with Africa, just with some countries that were members of OPEC. We have some representation there. But after Chavez, President Chavez always spoke about Mother Africa and how we should get together, and the importance of South-South relations.
So we were just listening to Yuri Pimentel. He's the Vice Minister of African Affairs in Venezuela, and we just completed a report from our Caracas correspondent, Freddie Gillingham. Other news now. At the Todos Somos Venezuela event on Wednesday, Telesur sat down with for an exclusive interview with Radical Gualbanans of Trinidad and Tobago, who comes from the Movement for Social Justice, a party born out of the trade union movement and which has long been in solidarity with Cuba and Venezuela.
Everything impressed me.
Yeah?
I was in Venezuela 25 years ago.
Okay.
And there's a stark difference from what it was. The hills have been transformed, there are good housing. It used to be a lot of shops. The streets were poor, there were not very many businesses.
Sure.
I am really impressed.
Yeah.
And all the negative media that has been hitting our airwaves, it's not true.
Yeah.
It's sporadic, probably.
Yeah.
But I'm not seeing it. I'm not seeing evidence of that poverty that they talk about.
Sure.
Across Latin America, tributes have been paid to Hugo Chavez on the 5th anniversary of his death. In Bolivia, the authorities, diplomatic corps, and social movements are remembering the ideals and legacies of the Bolivarian Revolution's leader, Hugo Chavez, 5 years after his passing. With floral offerings and an ancestral ceremony by an Aymara priest and priestess, the 50th anniversary of Hugo Chavez's death was commemorated. The event took place in the Cultural Center of San Francisco in La Paz. State ministers, ambassadors, along with military and leaders of the local police force attended the tribute. Chavez was remembered as one of the main defenders of Latin American unity.
Hugo Chavez was a leader who enabled our country to move forward, an inspiration to our President Evo Morales and to our Bolivian revolution. When we talk about Chavez as Latin Americans, we have to also mention Simón Bolívar, José Martí, San Martín, Juana Azurduy, and so many liberators.
There are so many emotions and feelings that connect us with the Bolivian people. We feel very grateful for Bolivia's solidarity, not just today, but every day.
Venezuela's Foreign Ministry released a communiqué today responding to statements made by the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. In the communiqué, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela rejected statements by UN High Commissioner for Human Rights Ziad Rial al-Hussein on democracy and the enforcement of human rights, also saying that irresponsible declarations of an interventionist nature are often preceded by meetings with extreme sectors of the Venezuelan opposition. Well, we'll take a short break now, but join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting.
We're making incredible progress. The women's unemployment rate hit the lowest level that it's been in 17 years.
Women are doing great? For real? For real? Let's talk about the job situation in your country, President Trump. In the United States, the following professions are at least 80% female: teachers, nurses, secretaries, and healthcare. These female-dominated professions are essential, but not well-paid or high status. Women dominating lower-paid jobs is a huge problem because it leaves many in a tough financial position. Equal workload should mean equal payment, but in real life, that's not the case. Studies show that in the US, women only earn as much as men if they are a dental hygienist, HR specialist, or advertising salesperson. A lot of career options, right? Trump thinks it's fine though, because as long as this capitalist patriarchal system is in the run, women, the LGBT community, and people of color will keep on being exploited and affected by it.
Welcome back. In Brazil, the Landless Workers Movement, the MST, has occupied a farm allegedly belonging to President Michel Temer. Around 350 members took part in the event. The farm is registered to Agiplan, a company belonging to João Batista Lima Filho, a personal friend of Brazilian President Michel Temer. The protesters demanded that the farm and all land acquired by illegal means be designated for Brazil's agrarian reform program. The medical staff in charge of Colombian presidential candidate Rodrigo Londoño say his health has deteriorated since he was admitted to hospital last week. The former FARC leader, also known as Timonchenko, had a heart attack last Thursday. He was scheduled to undergo surgery. Doctors are trying to control Londoño's pulmonary and vascular complications. And on March 11, Colombians will choose their senators and lawmakers for the next 4 years. Political analysts, however, are warning that the country faces many challenges.
The head of the mission for electoral observation, Alejandra Barrios, said the new Congress will face a huge task to maintain the agreements achieved through the peace process and to push for reforms of the judicial system.
We are talking about a big political reform that will allow the democratization of the country, a reform of the justice system to break the circle of impunity among political groups and those who have the responsibility to make justice.
Will the new Colombian Congress be able to face these challenges? Many are skeptical. Political researchers and activists point out that around 60 candidates are under investigation for corruption or other related felonies. The chances of them being elected are high.
All the 48 lawmakers seriously linked with corruption are going to be elected, according to the data we have, or they will choose their sons or cousins.
At least 40% of Congress will be in the hands of corruption, mobs, or sectors opposed to any kind of reform towards peace. This could bring disastrous effects for Colombia.
What does this mean? That the reforms designed to end corruption or give land to the people are meant to fail.
The Electoral Observation Mission says there are 170 Colombian municipalities that risk fraud or violence. However, it is also concerned about the political dogma in the electoral process.
Perhaps one of the bigger risks in this electoral campaign is the general intolerance. Citizens are not able to express themselves despite their different ideas and point of view.
This complex scenario is proven by the absence of guarantees for the political participation of alternative and progressive forces. Next Sunday, Colombians will have to decide if they want to play the game of democracy and inclusion or choose the nepotism and the corruption of traditional politics.
The National Electoral Council of Venezuela, or the CNE, has confirmed that 5 candidates will run for the presidency in the upcoming election scheduled for May 20th. One of the members of the CNE, Socorro Hernandez, said the candidates are Nicolas Maduro, Reinaldo Quijada, Javier Bertucci, Alejandro Ratti, and Henry Falcon. Falcon is the main opposition candidate running against President Maduro. Last week, the candidates agreed to respect the results of the elections. 11 countries are signing the new Trans-Pacific Trade Agreement, or CPTPP, in the Chilean capital, Santiago. The deal is set to slash tariffs among member nations by 2019. The pact impacts 500 million people and represents 13% of the world's gross domestic product. The United States withdrew from the trade pact, claiming it would hurt their companies and take jobs away. This will be Chilean President Michelle Bachelet's last public and international event before leaving office on Sunday. Salvador Zuniga, the husband of the late Honduran indigenous activist Bertha Cáceres, has accused the state of covering for those guilty of her murder 2 years ago. Zuniga said an independent investigation found that authorities have refused to issue arrest warrants against the suspects, despite growing evidence over the weekend. Over the weekend, police arrested and charged the executive president of Desarrollos Energéticos for conspiracy to murder. He is the 9th arrest made in connection with the killing. And in Guatemala, 5 former senior military members are facing trial for a case of forced disappearance more than 30 years after it occurred.
Guatemala's courts are trying to resolve a case that reopens a chapter of the worst years of the country's military dictatorship. The detention of the child, Marco Antonio Molina Teysen, and his subsequent disappearance by the army goes to the Guatemalan courts 37 years later.
Marco Antonio Molina Teysen was considered an enemy because his family was opposed to the government. He was considered an enemy even though he was only a child, even though he didn't have any political affiliation. He wasn't a threat. This shows that children were targets of war.
The minor was captured after his sister, Emma, escaped from a military headquarters where she was detained for subversion. During her detention, she was tortured and sexually abused. 3 decades later, the Molina Teysen family hasn't given up on finding out the truth about what happened.
It was very painful. It's still a pain that will be with us until our death.
We want Marco Antonio back. We want him back. But there have been many years of darkness, of solitude in the family. We had to leave the country.
5 former senior military members of 1981 are facing charges for the enforced disappearance of Marco Antonio and for the torture and sexual abuse to his sister Emma. The trial has been deemed historic by human rights organizations because of its significance for justice and for the victims of the armed conflict.
It's the first case in Guatemala of the disappearance of a minor. There have been more cases where it was clear it was politics against minor insurgents. However, there was never a trial the way it's happening now with this case.
We are hoping that this ends with an advancement on human rights in Guatemala. And for us, to get what we want, which is to get the remains of my brother. This is the most vital demand of our family.
According to historical documents, approximately 5,000 children disappeared during the war. Some were illegally adopted, and others, their whereabouts, are still unknown.
Pope Francis has approved a miracle attributed to Salvadorian Archbishop Oscar Romero, clearing the way for him to be made a saint. Romero was gunned down by right-wing death squads during El Salvador's military dictatorship in 1980. Pope Francis declared him a martyr in 2015 and unblocked his sainthood case, setting him on the path to canonization. Romero was Archbishop of San Salvador at the start of El Salvador's 1979 to 1992 civil war, and he preached against oppression by government forces. And the president of El Salvador has welcomed the news. Salvador Sanchez Seren tweeted, "The Vatican's announcement of the coming canonization of Monsignor Romero fills us with immense joy." In Antigua and Barbuda, the leader of the Barbuda People's Movement, Trevor Walker, is filing an injunction against the Antigua and Barbuda Electoral Commission. He wants them to stop voting at a polling station in Antigua as opposed to doing it in the constituency of Barbuda. Residents of Barbuda were evacuated from the island after Hurricane Irma hit in September last year. A few hundred residents have returned. Walker argues there are no special circumstances that prevent Barbudans from voting in Barbuda. The Electoral Commission fired back, saying the court has no jurisdiction in the case because the court can only hear matters dealing with the results of an election. The case resumes on Thursday and elections take place on March 21st.
My vehicle was submerged.
The governor of Puerto Rico, Ricardo Rosselló, has announced a new budget of $300,000 for the High Performance Sports Program, which will benefit 32 elite athletes. The funds will help potential athletes who have the opportunity to participate in the 2018 Central American and Caribbean Games and the Olympic Games of Tokyo 2020. 24 Latin American and Caribbean countries signed the legally binding Escazú agreement in San Jose, Costa Rica, to protect environmental activists from threats and acts of violence. The countries vow to guarantee safety for activists and to prosecute any acts of violence against them so they can pursue their activities without fear. The agreement also focuses on granting and protecting access to environmental information. The Food and Agriculture Regional Conference for Latin America and the Caribbean is taking place in Jamaica. 33 countries will develop an agenda to fight hunger and malnutrition in the region. During the regional forum, ministers of agriculture and high-level officials of member nations are meeting to discuss challenges and priority matters related to food and agriculture to ensure regional cooperation on global policies and political issues. In Bolivia, female artists are taking workshops to learn how best to add their knowledge to Wikipedia. Articles edited by Bolivian women are expected to increase. Freddie Morales reports.
Although anyone can edit material on Wikipedia, most of the content on Bolivia is generated by foreign contributors.
Wikipedia is a global source of information, and we believe Bolivia and the Spanish sphere in general should have a say. Most of the Wikipedia content is generated in English, and then it gets translated into Spanish.
This workshop, aimed at female artists, is pushing for the creation of more native articles from Bolivia.
There are more articles about our country in German than in Spanish, so we think it is the right time to change this.
The goal is to push these women to share their knowledge with the world. This initiative is also a way to promote the feminist movement. Knowing the Wikipedia editing tools becomes fundamental.
We have all used Wikipedia at some point. Some of us even clicked on the top right, where the edit option is. We are allowed to improve any article and also add more references.
Carla is a literature student who is already creating new stories and new versions of all stories for the virtual encyclopedia.
I have written about relevant Bolivian women in the 19th century. There was not much information about them.
67% of Bolivians have access to the internet, so institutions are promoting it as a means to increase citizens' participation. The goal is to make Bolivians switch from consumers to producers of quality content on the web.
In Mexico, a group of deportees from the United States has launched a company called Deportados, producing an anti-Trump clothing line called Bad Hombre. Bad Hombre refers to a comment made by Donald Trump during the 2016 presidential election, where he referred to some Mexican immigrants as bad hombres. The group plans to raise enough money to support their families in the U.S. with the hope of eventually rejoining them. Brand member Ana Laura Lopez said the brand was formed sometime after her deportation in 2016, when she met with several other deportees who, like her, could not find jobs.
We started selling sweets in the streets for a few months, and we sent out some T-shirts for people to identify us in the street. People, instead of buying sweets, wanted to buy the shirts because they liked them, and that's how the Deportados brand emerged.
So time now for another short break, but join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting. Welcome back. Sierra Leone heads to the polls today for a general election that will elect a new president, as well as parliament and local councils. Candidate Julius Maada Bio of the opposition wrapped up campaigning on Tuesday and will face off against current Foreign Minister Samura Kamara. Following these elections, President Ernest Bai Koroma will be ending his second and final term as head of the West African nation, which continues to be one of the world's poorest. Now let's have a look at some other stories making headlines from around the world.
Spanish farmers took to the streets of Madrid to demand more water for their crops in the Levante area. The region that goes from Alicante to Almeria on the coast has been hit hard by the worst drought in decades.
We are not going to stop until we get a definite solution. The stress, the anguish that the farmer and citizens of Murcia, Alicante and Almeria experience isn't experienced in any other part of the country.
In Greece, members of the Popular Unity Party held a protest outside a notary office in Athens against housing auctions. Clashes between protesters and police forces left one person injured. The auction of private residential housing foreclosed due to payment difficulties was one of the preconditions for Greece to receive finance set by the European Union and the IMF. Thousands of women have marched in the Ghanaian capital of Conakry in protest at a violent crackdown on political demonstrations following elections last month. They carried banners saying, "Too many deaths, the state is still asleep," in reference to President Alpha Conde. Around a dozen people have died in political unrest since early February, some of whom were shot dead by police.
And finally, hundreds of fishermen in the coastal town of Huangqi in eastern China celebrate the festival of the ocean gods. In the century-old ritual, they march with decorated palanquins dressed in traditional costumes, chanting prayers, asking for abundant catches for the next year. They also pray for their safety at sea. Well, we've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at talisyoutv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I'm Sonia Gray. Thank you so much for watching, and a very special thank you to our new viewers in Antigua and Barbuda.